The caretaker's routine. Lisa had always believed in the simplicity of her job. As a caretaker in an old health facility, her nights were usually quiet. The long halls were dimly lit, and the faint hum of medical equipment was the only sound that filled the space. Most patients slept through the night, and Lisa's job was to make sure they were comfortable. She would walk the halls, check on each room, adjust a blanket here, and refill a water glass there. The facility wasn't large. There were only a handful of patients, most of whom were elderly or recovering from long-term illnesses. Lisa had worked there for 3 years, and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. She liked the predictability. It made her feel in control. But that night felt different. It was colder than usual. Lisa wrapped her sweater tightly around herself as she walked the hallway. Room 7 was at the far end, right next to the emergency exit. No one had occupied that room for months. The last patient had left weeks ago. And since then, the bed had been empty, covered with a plain white blanket. Lisa often glanced into the room as she passed, but tonight, something made her stop. The blanket moved. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe the air vent caused it to shift. But as she stood there, staring through the slightly opened door, she saw it again, just a faint ripple, as if someone had shifted underneath it. Her heart began to race. The facility was locked at night. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without her noticing. Slowly, she pushed the door open, the creaking sound echoing in the stillness. "Hello." Lisa's voice was soft, but it felt loud in the silence. No one answered. She took a few steps into the room, her eyes fixed on the bed. The blanket lay flat now, unmoving. Maybe she imagined it. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the blanket. With one quick motion, she lifted it. Her breath caught. A boy lay curled up on the bed. His small frame was trembling, and his eyes flickered open as the light from the hallway spilled in. He looked no older than 10. His dark hair was messy, and his clothes looked worn and dirty. Lisa stepped back in shock. "Who are you?" she whispered. The boy didn't answer right away. He simply pulled the blanket tighter around himself, as if trying to disappear. "Please," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't tell them I'm here." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around the empty room, confused and unsure of what to do. There were no records of a child being admitted. This wasn't supposed to happen. "You can't be here," Lisa said gently, though her voice trembled. "This room is empty. How did you get in?" The boy's eyes darted toward the door. "I climbed in through the window." He lied, but Lisa could tell it wasn't true. Room 7's window had been sealed shut for years. Lisa knew she should call someone. Maybe the police or the facilities manager. But something about the boy made her pause. He looked scared, more scared than any child should be. "Are you hurt?" she asked, stepping closer. The boy shook his head. "I just need to stay here for a little while," he said, his voice pleading. Lisa felt torn. This wasn't part of her job. She wasn't supposed to take care of mysterious children who appeared out of nowhere. But as she looked at the boy's frightened eyes, she couldn't bring herself to turn him away. "All right," she said finally. "You can stay. But just for tonight." The boy nodded, relief washing over his face. Lisa pulled the blanket back over him, tucking it in gently. "I'll bring you some water," she said, her mind racing as she left the room. As she walked down the hall, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had no idea who the boy was or why he was hiding, but one thing was certain. This night was far from ordinary. The hidden patient. Lisa couldn't sleep that night. Even after returning to her desk, she found herself glancing down the hallway, her eyes fixed on the door to room 7. The boy's face stayed in her mind, pale, frightened, and far too calm for a child who had just been discovered in a place he didn't belong. Her heart told her she had done the right thing by letting him stay, but her mind wasn't so sure. This wasn't a shelter, and Lisa wasn't supposed to deal with things like this. The facility was meant for elderly patients and long-term recovery cases, not strange children who appeared out of nowhere. By midnight, the silence of the facility felt heavier than usual. Lisa made her rounds again, this time slower than before. Her footsteps echoed faintly as she walked the empty corridors. Each room was the same as always, peaceful and still. But when she stopped at room 7, she lingered outside the door. Curiosity got the better of her. She pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The boy was awake. He was sitting up in bed, staring at the window as if waiting for something. His small figure seemed fragile under the blanket, but there was something unsettling about the way he sat. Too still, too focused. He didn't seem surprised to see Lisa watching him. "You should be sleeping," Lisa said softly, stepping inside. The boy's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Lisa felt like she was the one being examined, not the other way around. His gaze was sharp, intelligent, and far too intense for a child his age. "I don't sleep much," he replied quietly. Lisa frowned. "Why not?" The boy hesitated, his eyes flickering away as if he didn't want to answer. "I get bad dreams," he said finally, though Lisa could tell there was more to it. She pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. Her shift wasn't over for a few hours, and something about this child made her want to stay close. "You know," Lisa began, "when I was little, I used to get nightmares too. I'd wake up and think there was something under my bed. I wouldn't sleep until I checked every inch of my room." The boy's lips twitched slightly, almost forming a smile, but it disappeared just as quickly. "What did you do when the nightmares didn't go away?" he asked. Lisa thought for a moment. "I told someone. My mom used to sit with me until I fell asleep. Sometimes just knowing someone was there made the fear go away." The boy looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the blanket. "I don't have anyone to tell," he murmured. Lisa's chest tightened at his words. There was a sadness in his voice that seemed too deep for someone so young. "Well," she said gently, "you can tell me, if you want." The boy glanced up at her, and for a moment, Lisa saw hesitation in his eyes, like he wanted to trust her but wasn't sure if he should. "There's something different about you," Lisa said, carefully choosing her words. "I don't know how you got here, but I know you didn't climb through the window." The boy's body tensed slightly. He said nothing, but his silence told Lisa she was right. "You don't have to tell me everything," she continued, "but if there's something I need to know to keep you safe, you should let me help." For a long time, the boy didn't respond. The clock on the wall ticked softly, filling the quiet room. Finally, he exhaled, and his shoulders relaxed just a little. "I didn't mean to come here," he said, barely above a whisper. "I was trying to find somewhere else, but I ended up here instead." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Ended up here? Like you got lost?" The boy shook his head. "Not exactly. I ran away." Lisa leaned forward. "Ran away from what?" The boy's gaze darkened, and he wrapped his arms around his knees, curling into himself. "From them," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "They're looking for me. If they find me, I have to go back." Lisa's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something bigger. She didn't know who they were, but the fear in the boy's voice was real. "You're safe here," Lisa said firmly. "No one is going to find you." The boy looked at her, and for the first time, Lisa saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Lisa patted his shoulder gently. "Get some rest," she said as she stood up. "I'll check on you later." As she walked out of the room, Lisa couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. The boy had already laid back down, but his eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling. Lisa knew this wasn't over. Whoever the boy was running from would come looking for him. And when they did, she would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect him. The mysterious visitor. The next morning, Lisa arrived at the facility early, unable to shake the thoughts of the boy in room 7. She hadn't told anyone about him yet. A part of her feared what might happen if she did. He seemed fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. And the last thing she wanted was for someone to take him away before she could understand who, or what, he really was. As she approached room 7, she noticed the door was ajar. Her pulse quickened. She had left it closed the night before. Lisa stepped inside quietly, expecting to find the boy still curled up under the blanket. But the bed was empty. The blanket was neatly folded at the end, and the pillow was untouched, as if no one had slept there at all. Lisa's eyes darted around the room, scanning for any sign of him. The chair she had sat in the night before was still next to the bed, slightly pushed back. Where did he go? She whispered to herself, stepping deeper into the room. A faint shuffle caught her attention. Lisa turned toward the corner, where the window's curtains swayed slightly. She froze. The boy was standing there, half hidden by the curtain. His eyes met hers, wide and alert, as if he had been waiting for her to arrive. "You scared me," Lisa said with a nervous chuckle, lowering her voice. "Why are you hiding over there?" The boy didn't answer right away. He stepped out from behind the curtain, his bare feet light against the cold floor. "I heard voices," he said quietly. "I thought they might be here for me." Lisa's brow furrowed. "No one's looking for you here," she reassured him, kneeling to meet his eye level. "The facility is closed to visitors until noon. There's no one else but the staff." The boy glanced at the door. "They don't always come through the front," he said softly. Lisa didn't know how to respond to that. His words carried a weight that seemed out of place for a child. There was something about the way he spoke, with calm certainty, that left Lisa unsettled. "Who are they?" she finally asked. The boy looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers nervously. "People I was supposed to stay with," he answered carefully. "But they aren't good people. I ran away before they could take me somewhere bad." Lisa's eyes narrowed. His story didn't sound like the typical runaway case. There was a strange vagueness to his words, as if he was trying to tell the truth without revealing too much. "You're not telling me everything," she said gently. The boy met her gaze, and for a moment, Lisa saw something flicker in his eyes. Something deeper, something older. "I can't," he replied simply. Lisa sighed and sat down in the chair. She could press him for answers, but something told her it wouldn't work. He was holding back, but not out of distrust. It was as if he was protecting her by not saying more. "All right," she said finally, "I won't ask. But if something happens, you need to tell me. I can't help if I don't know what's going on." The boy nodded slowly, though Lisa wasn't sure how much comfort her words actually gave him. A moment of silence passed between them. Lisa's eyes wandered to the window. Outside, the sky was overcast, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. The facility felt quieter than usual, as if the building itself was holding its breath. "What's your name?" she asked after a while, breaking the silence. The boy hesitated. "Eli," he said softly. Lisa smiled. "That's a nice name. I'm Lisa." "I know," Eli replied, tilting his head slightly. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" Eli didn't answer. Instead, he moved to sit back on the bed, pulling his knees up to his chest. Lisa watched him for a moment before deciding to let it go. She stood and walked toward the door, pausing in the doorway. "I'll bring you something to eat," she said. "You must be hungry." Eli shook his head. "I don't eat much." Lisa frowned. "You need to eat something." "I'll be fine," Eli insisted, his voice calm but firm. Lisa opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. This wasn't a normal situation, and Eli clearly wasn't a normal child. She would have to take things one step at a time. "All right," she relented. "But if you change your mind, let me know." As she stepped into the hallway, Lisa couldn't help but feel as if she was leaving more than just a room behind. Something about Eli lingered in her thoughts long after she closed the door. By the time she returned to her desk, Lisa realized she was no longer just a caretaker. She had taken on something else, something far bigger than herself. And as much as she wanted to believe otherwise, A small voice in the back of her mind whispered that Eli's story was far from over. The strange warning. The next few days passed quietly, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Eli rarely left room 7, spending most of his time sitting by the window or lying under the blanket. He didn't talk much, but his presence felt heavier with each passing day. Lisa tried to keep things normal. She brought him books from the small facility library, but he barely touched them. She offered him food, but he only nibbled at small portions, as if eating was an afterthought. Despite this, he never seemed weak or tired. In fact, there was something about him that seemed stronger every time she saw him. One evening, as Lisa made her rounds, she noticed Eli standing by the window, his eyes fixed on the forest beyond the facility's edge. His expression was blank, but his posture was tense. "Eli?" Lisa called softly from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "They're getting closer," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She stepped into the room, glancing out the window. The forest stretched out, dark and quiet beneath the overcast sky. Nothing seemed unusual. "There's no one out there," she said, trying to reassure him and herself. Eli finally looked at her, his eyes darker than she remembered. "You can't see them yet," he replied. "But they can see us." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you talking about?" "The people I ran from," Eli answered, his gaze drifting back to the window. "They're not far now." Lisa took a slow breath, trying to keep her voice calm. "How do you know that?" Eli hesitated, as if deciding whether to tell her. "I can feel them," he said eventually. "They're looking for me." Lisa didn't know how to respond. She stepped closer to him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. His skin was warm, too warm. "Eli," she said softly, crouching down to his level, "if someone is after you, I need to know who they are. I can't help if you don't tell me the truth." Eli looked into her eyes, and for the first time, she saw fear flicker beneath his calm exterior. "They're not normal people," he admitted. "They take things from others. And once they have it, those people don't come back the same." Lisa's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly. "What do they want from you?" Eli hesitated, his eyes darting to the hallway as if he expected someone to walk in. "I have something they need," he said carefully. "Something inside me." Lisa's heart pounded. She didn't know if he meant that figuratively or literally, but either way, it sounded dangerous. "You're safe here," Lisa assured him, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. "No one can get in without me knowing." Eli gave a small nod but didn't look convinced. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She sat at the front desk, her eyes constantly flicking to the hallway that led to room 7. The facility's soft hum, usually comforting, felt eerie. Every creak of the old building made her heart race. By midnight, she decided to check on Eli again. As she approached his room, she noticed something strange. The lights in the hallway flickered, dimming for a few seconds before returning to normal. Lisa's footsteps slowed. Her instincts screamed that something wasn't right. When she reached room 7, she found Eli sitting on the edge of the bed, fully awake. "They're here," he said softly, before she could speak. Lisa's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Eli's eyes locked onto the door. "They're inside now." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She stepped toward the door, peeking out into the hallway. Everything looked the same, empty and quiet. "There's no one there," she whispered, but Eli shook his head. "They don't always look the way you expect," he said. "They can hide in plain sight." Lisa's heart thumped loudly in her chest. She wanted to tell herself he was just scared, that his imagination was running wild. But deep down, she knew better. A faint sound echoed from down the hall. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, like the soft scrape of shoes against the floor. Lisa stiffened. "I need to check," she said, though every part of her screamed to stay with Eli. "No," Eli said firmly, his eyes wide with warning. "If you go out there, They'll see you. Lisa hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear. What do we do? She whispered, stepping back into the room and locking the door behind her. Eli's gaze shifted to the window. We wait, he said. Lisa sat on the chair beside the bed, her hands trembling slightly as she listened to the faint noises outside. The sounds faded after a while, but the tension in the room lingered. Neither of them spoke, but Lisa knew one thing for certain. Whatever Eli was running from, it was closer than she ever imagined. The escape plan. Lisa barely slept after that night. Even when the facility was quiet, she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching. Eli's words echoed in her mind. They're inside now. She tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. But something had. The air felt heavier, and shadows seemed to stretch longer than before. The patients remained unaware, their routines unbroken. But Lisa noticed little things that didn't sit right. Supplies were moved slightly out of place. The security cameras flickered now and then. And sometimes, just for a second, she felt someone standing behind her, though no one was ever there when she turned around. Eli stayed in room 7, barely speaking. Lisa could tell he was on edge. His eyes always flicked toward the door whenever she entered, as if he expected someone else to walk in behind her. By the 4th day, Lisa couldn't take it anymore. We can't stay like this, she told Eli that evening, her voice low but firm. If these people are really looking for you, we need to get you out of here. Eli sat on the bed, staring at his hands. They'll find me no matter where I go, he said quietly. Lisa knelt in front of him, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. Not if we're smart about it, she replied. I know this facility better than anyone. I can get you out without them noticing. Eli met her gaze, searching her face for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe courage. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. All right, he whispered. Lisa exhaled, relief washing over her. She didn't have a full plan yet, but she knew they couldn't stay in room 7 any longer. The escape began that night. Lisa waited until the building was silent, save for the faint hum of medical equipment. Most of the staff had left, and only the night nurse was on duty. She carefully unlocked the back supply room, where an old laundry cart sat unused in the corner. The wheels squeaked slightly as she rolled it into the hallway. Eli watched from the doorway of room 7, his small figure barely visible in the dim light. Climb in, Lisa whispered. Eli hesitated but obeyed, carefully tucking himself beneath the folded linens she had placed inside. Lisa draped a thick blanket over the top to hide him completely. You'll have to stay quiet, okay, she said softly. Eli's muffled voice responded, I understand. Lisa pushed the cart forward, her hands trembling slightly on the handle. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of her, every corner feeling like a trap. She passed the first set of patient rooms without incident. The second hallway, however, felt different. The lights above flickered again, and as she turned the corner, Lisa saw someone standing at the far end of the corridor. It was a man she didn't recognize, tall, dressed in a black coat, his face partially hidden by shadows. Lisa's grip on the cart tightened. The man wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. Stay calm, she whispered under her breath, forcing herself to keep walking. As she passed the man, she felt his gaze linger, following her every step. Don't stop. Don't look back. When she finally reached the staff entrance, Lisa's heart was pounding so loudly she thought it might give them away. She swiped her access card, and the lock clicked softly. The cool night air hit her as the door opened, but the relief was short-lived. Where are you going, Lisa? The voice behind her froze her in place. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as the man from the hallway stepped into the light. His features were sharp, his eyes unnervingly pale. I was just. Lisa started, but the man's gaze flicked to the laundry cart. You shouldn't interfere, he said, his voice calm but laced with something dark. The boy isn't your responsibility. Lisa stepped protectively between him and the cart. He is now, she said firmly. The man took a step closer, But Lisa didn't back down. "If you try to take him, I'll scream," she warned. "And I'm not the only one here tonight." The man's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Lisa thought he might call her bluff, but instead, he smiled faintly. "You won't make it far," he said, turning back toward the hallway. "We'll find him again. We always do." Lisa didn't wait for him to disappear. She shoved the cart forward, pushing through the staff exit and into the night. Eli peeked out from under the blanket as they reached the parking lot. "Who was that?" he asked quietly. Lisa's hand shook as she helped him climb out of the cart. "I don't know," she admitted, leading him toward her car. "But we're not sticking around to find out." As they drove away from the facility, Lisa glanced at Eli in the rearview mirror. His eyes were glued to the window, watching the trees blur past. She didn't know where they were going, but one thing was clear. Eli was in danger, and whatever he was running from wasn't human. "You said," the truth revealed. The road stretched endlessly in front of them, dark and winding through the forest, like a snake slithering between the trees. The faint hum of the engine was the only sound breaking the silence inside the car. Lisa's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale under the dim dashboard light. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking for headlights that never appeared. Eli sat quietly in the back seat, his small frame pressed against the door as he watched the trees blur past. He hadn't said much since they left the facility. Lisa could feel the weight of his silence, thick and heavy like a storm cloud lingering just overhead. "You okay back there?" she asked, trying to break the uneasy quiet. Eli's gaze shifted to meet hers in the mirror. "I'm fine," he replied softly. Lisa wasn't convinced. "You sure? You've barely said a word since we left." For a long moment, Eli didn't respond. His eyes drifted back to the window, as if he was searching for something hidden in the shadows. "They're still following us," he finally said. Lisa's stomach twisted. She glanced at the empty road behind them. There was nothing but darkness stretching for miles. "I don't see anyone," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Eli didn't answer. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising anxiety curling in her chest. "Eli, I need to know what's really going on. You said you were running from people, but this isn't normal. Who are they? What do they want from you?" Eli hesitated. His hands fidgeted in his lap, twisting the fabric of his worn hoodie. "It's not just people," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "They aren't like you." Lisa's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What do you mean?" Eli glanced at her again, uncertainty flickering across his face. "I wasn't born here," he admitted quietly. "I came from somewhere else." Lisa's brow furrowed. "You mean out of state?" "No," Eli said, shaking his head. "Not this planet." For a moment, the words didn't register. Lisa blinked, eyes fixed on the road, unsure if she heard him correctly. "I'm sorry." "What?" "I'm not human," Eli said softly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Lisa's foot lifted slightly off the gas pedal. She turned to look at him, but his face remained calm, steady, like he had accepted this truth long ago. I don't understand," she stammered. "I wasn't supposed to come here," Eli explained, his voice distant, like he was recalling a memory from long ago. "My people sent me away to keep me safe, but I ended up in the wrong place. The ones following me, they're not from Earth either. They're hunters. They track people like me down." Lisa's mind raced. She wanted to believe it was some elaborate story, the product of a frightened child's imagination. But deep down, she knew better. Eli wasn't like other children. His strange calmness, his glowing skin, the way the man at the facility seemed to appear and disappear without a trace. It all fit, even if she didn't want it to. "You're serious," Lisa said quietly. Eli nodded. Lisa exhaled slowly, her mind struggling to process the weight of his words. "Why are they after you?" "I carry something inside me," Eli said, his eyes lowering to his chest. Something powerful. They want to take it, but if they do, I won't survive. Lisa's heart pounded. What is it? Eli hesitated again, as if the words were too heavy to speak. It's a kind of energy. My people call it the core. It's part of who I am. The hunters use it to make themselves stronger. Lisa's mouth felt dry. So, they want to kill you for it. Eli's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw the full depth of fear hidden behind his calm expression. Yes. A cold shiver ran down Lisa's spine. She thought about the man she saw at the facility, the pale eyes, the way he seemed to know exactly who she was and what she was doing. How do we stop them? She asked. Eli looked out the window again. We can't stop them, he said softly. But we can run. Lisa tightened her grip on the wheel, determination burning in her chest. Then we'll keep running, she said firmly. Eli's eyes softened with gratitude, but Lisa knew the danger wasn't over. If what he said was true, those hunters wouldn't stop until they found him. As the road stretched endlessly ahead, Lisa made a silent vow. Whatever happened, she wouldn't let them take Eli. No matter what it cost her. The final stand. The further Lisa drove, the darker the sky seemed to grow. The road twisted through dense forest, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. Rain began to patter against the windshield, thin droplets at first, but gradually thickening into heavy sheets. The wipers groaned under the strain, barely keeping up. Eli sat quietly in the back, his head resting against the window. Lisa glanced at him through the mirror, his reflection faint and pale in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. We can't keep running forever, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the forest, as if something out there was calling to him. I know, he replied softly. But they won't stop. They're already close. Lisa's hands tightened on the wheel. She could feel it too, that strange, suffocating presence that had followed them from the facility. It lingered in the air like static, invisible but unmistakable. How do we fight them? She asked, her heart thudding in her chest. Eli's gaze finally met hers in the mirror. You can't, he said. But I can. Lisa frowned. Eli, you're just a kid. I'm not, he interrupted, his voice calm but heavy with something ancient. I may look like one, but I'm not. I've been running for a long time. It's time I stop. Lisa's stomach twisted. There was something unsettling about the way he said it, like he had accepted a fate she wasn't ready to face. Before she could argue, Eli sat up straight, his eyes narrowing toward the road ahead. Stop the car, he said abruptly. Lisa's heart jumped. What? Why? They're here, Eli said, his voice sharper now. Lisa's pulse quickened. Her foot hovered over the brake, and then she saw it. Through the rain-slicked windshield, barely visible in the headlights, a figure stood in the middle of the road. The man from the facility. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the wet pavement. The tires screeched, but the car came to a halt just feet from the figure. The man didn't move. His pale eyes glowed faintly in the rain, fixed on Eli in the backseat. Lisa's heart pounded as she shifted the car into reverse, but before she could press the gas, another figure stepped out from the forest. Then another. They emerged silently, circling the car like predators stalking prey. Lisa, Eli said, his voice calm but urgent. Unlock the doors. Lisa's head snapped around. What? Are you insane? I'm not letting them in. Eli's eyes glowed faintly, the same pale shimmer as the figures outside. They're not here for you, he said softly. They're here for me. Lisa's hand hovered over the lock. Her instincts screamed at her to keep driving, to plow through the figures if necessary. But deep down, she knew Eli was right. They won't stop unless I face them, Eli added. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. There has to be another way, she pleaded. Eli gave her a small, sad smile. Thank you for everything, he whispered. But this is the only way. Reluctantly, Lisa pressed the button. The locks clicked open. The figures didn't move right away. They stood still, as if waiting for Eli's invitation. Slowly, Eli opened the back door and stepped out into the rain. Lisa's heart ached as she watched his small figure stand before the hunters, dwarfed by their towering presence. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest for a brief second. In that moment, Lisa saw Eli for who he truly was, not a child, but something far older, cloaked in a fragile body that barely contained the energy beneath his skin. The hunters closed in, but Eli didn't flinch. He raised his hand, and for a moment, the rain seemed to pause midair. A bright pulse of light erupted from Eli's palm, rippling outward in a wave that sent the hunters staggering back. The ground trembled beneath Lisa's feet as the light expanded, swallowing the figures one by one. When the light finally faded, the road was empty. Eli stood alone, rain cascading down his face. Lisa rushed out of the car, running to his side. "Eli, are you okay?" He nodded weakly. "It's over," he said softly. Lisa knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his trembling form. His body felt lighter, as if the energy that once filled him had dimmed. "You don't have to run anymore," she whispered. Eli smiled faintly, his head resting against her shoulder. "I think I can stay, for a little while." Lisa held him tightly as the rain poured around them. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: Eli had found his refuge, and she would protect him, no matter what.